Good morning. We left off with Palmer going to ringer school, and he actually stood and wrung the sock because he realized it wasn't a real pigeon. Let's find out how he's going to react the next few weeks as it gets closer to time to be a ringer. Chapter 29. Palmer caught the weightless, foamy basketball. He turned it in his hands to look at Nipper's name in broad marker strokes. He tossed the ball back to Dorothy. Nipper chuckled down at them from a curtain rod. "If it was only a sock," said Dorothy. "Why do you keep worrying about it?" Palmer got up and paced back and forth. "I'm worrying because in 13 days I'm going to be 10, and 28 days after that is Family Fest, and then it won't be a sock anymore." No one spoke for a while. Nipper flew to the basket rim. Palmer paced. At last, Dorothy said, "Tell them." Palmer looked at her. "Huh?" "Tell them." "Tell them what?" "You don't want to be a ringer. You're not going to be a ringer." Palmer stared. "Tell who?" Dorothy stared back. Suddenly a huge grin broke across her face. She threw out her arms. "Everybody!" Dorothy jumped down from her usual perch on Palmer's desk. Palmer glared at her. He sneered. "Yeah, right." "Okay, then," she said. "How about if I tell them?" She bolted for the window. She threw up the screen, leaned out over the porch roof, and yelled, "Hey, everybody! I have an announcement!" Palmer yanked her back into the room and slammed down the screen. He stood red-faced, fuming. Dorothy wiggled and giggled out of his grasp and went to play with Nipper. Palmer shut the window and locked it. He pulled down the shade, but he could not shut out the cold, wet feeling that he had just peeked into his future. When he turned back to Dorothy, he found her wearing an impish grin. "So," she said, "are you going to invite me to your birthday party this year?" Palmer sagged. He'd been dreading this. So far, his social life had been neatly divided between two separate relationships, one with Dorothy, one with the guys. Dorothy herself helped keep it that way by avoiding him whenever the guys were around. Last year, except for his mother's complaint, it had been fairly easy not to invite Dorothy. This year was hugely different. Dorothy was now his best friend, the only person in the world with whom he shared Nipper. How could he not invite her? And how could he not invite the guys? "Well," said Dorothy, "maybe I won't even have a party," he said. But he knew he would, because the guys were already talking about it. They were expecting it, and because his strategy for surviving the summer was simply this: stay on their good side. It was becoming harder and harder to do, for in these recent weeks Palmer had come to realize that, with the possible exception of Henry, the guys whose company he had once craved, he now feared. If they ever found out for sure that he was a traitor, Farquhar's treatment would feel like baby's play compared to what they could do. He imagined them torturing him until he led them to his forbidden pet. At that point, Nipper was as good as dead. So when his mother at dinner one day said, "Do you want a party this year?" Palmer's answer was yes. After a long pause, his mother said, "Okay, but you have to invite Dorothy too." Palmer just shrugged and nodded. Sometimes the effort of getting through each day left him heavy and dopey by dinner time. He wished he could just go to bed and not wake up until September. And then his mother sprinkled salt on a baked potato and ever so casually, "You don't happen to know anyone looking for a lost cat, do you?" Instantly, Palmer was alert. "No. Why?" "Oh," she said, "I've noticed one around the last few days." Did a spider just walk across his shoulders? "Around where?" "Backyard, around the side. That was yesterday. Today I found it inside on the stairway." Palmer's heart pounded in his chest. "What color?" "Yellow," she said, reaching for the pepper. She said more, but he was not hearing. He was racing upstairs, bursting into his room, finding Nipper healthy and plump and waddling across the floor to meet him. He fell to his knees and pounded his fist again and again into his thigh. Where do you think the cat came from? Do you remember? Early in the book. Whose cat? And why do you think it was inside on the stairs? That's the first question for today. Let's see if we can find out. Chapter 30. Although she insisted that she would be there right up to the last minute, Dorothy did not come to Palmer's birthday party. Neither did his mother. "I'll leave your father to deal with your hoodlum friends this year," she said, and went off shopping. The guys were thrilled. They had learned about the sharpshooter award, and to them Palmer's father was as big a hero as a battlefield general. They kept running back to the den to look at and touch the trophy. They flung questions. "Is it real gold, Mr. LaRue? How many pigeons did you shoot? Can we see your gun?" At the dining room table, Beans gave a speech about himself, about his hatred of pigeons, and how many necks he intended to wring. He called to Palmer's father, who was in the kitchen planting candles on the cake. "I bet you hate them dirty birds, even more than me, don't you, Mr. LaRue?" Palmer's father came to the doorway. He looked directly at Beans. He smiled. "No," he said, "I don't hate pigeons. Never did." He returned to the cake. The empty look on Beans's face indicated that the answer had reached his ears, but no farther. He called, "You were a ringer, right, Mr. LaRue?" "I was." "And now Snots is too, huh? How about that?" The reply from the kitchen came after a long pause. "Palmer decides for himself. It's up to him." Palmer gaped at the doorway as Beans thumped his fist on the table and growled, "Where's the grub?" Like everyone else, Palmer ate his ice cream and cake, but he wasn't hungry. He opened his presents, but did not enjoy them. On this day that he had dreaded for so long, he had no appetite for anything. As everyone belted out, "Happy birthday," Palmer stared at the man marching in with the cake and tried to imagine him pulling the trigger again and again as gray feathered nippers fell to the ground. The cake was placed in front of him, and Palmer found that he could neither move nor breathe. The heat from the 10 tiny fires burned his face. In the plump, shimmering shapes of the candle flames, he saw the ghosts of 10 pigeons. "Blow 'em out!" someone squawked. Palmer squeezed his eyes shut and blew them out. Outside, after the party, they went in search of Farquhar. When Palmer recalled last year's treatment, he could hardly believe his own memory. Pride, honor, little kids lining up to touch his devastated arm. True, last year he felt the same terror that he felt now, but he knew that after Farquhar's 10 knuckles this year, no pride, no honor awaited him, only pain and uselessness. To his great relief, they could not find Farquhar. At dinner time, the boys split up and Palmer returned home alone. He fed and played with Nipper. He did not feed himself. He received a happy birthday phone call from Dorothy. Dusk was falling outside when a twinge of hunger sent him to the kitchen. He found the half-left-over cake covered and sitting atop the refrigerator. He got it down. He set it on the table. He lifted the cover and gasped aloud. Finger-lettered in the chocolate icing along the side of the 2-layer cake was a single word: tonight. What do you think that means in the side of the cake? Someone wrote tonight. Who do you think wrote it, and what do you think it means? We're going to find out in the next chapter. Chapter 31. Henry. Thinking back, Palmer recalled that as the gang was leaving the house that afternoon, Henry had rushed back in, claiming he had forgotten something. Henry, whose streak, unlike Beans, was meek, not mean, who ran with Beans and Meadow, who did what they did, but was different, who Palmer had seen one day pulling his little sister around the block in a wagon. Henry had done it, put the word into the icing, tonight. It was a warning. Something was going to happen tonight. Something not good. But what? As he smeared over the word with a dinner knife, Palmer thought about it. The only place he would be at night would be in his room, in bed. If something bad were going to happen to him, that's where it would have to be. It must have something to do with Beans and Meadow. Or the cat. The cat had already been slipped into the house. Maybe this time, tonight, they would slip themselves in. They had already done so once. And lately, Beans especially had taken an interest in Palmer's room. Palmer, acting put out with his parents, kept insisting he was not allowed to have visitors upstairs. This, however, had not prevented Beans from climbing the stairs to the bathroom no fewer than 3 times during his party. Palmer considered phoning Henry to ask him directly, but that felt risky. Left to his best guess, he decided the warning meant that he was to have visitors that night. Considering the guy's recent suspicions, it did not take a genius to figure out that the purpose of the visit had to do with a certain feathered roommate. He went upstairs to feed Nipper, who had returned from his daily wanderings. While the pigeon pecked at nacho pieces, Palmer sat on the bed to think the whole thing through. It occurred to him that he could close and lock his window and thus keep them out. It was a simple solution. But it also created its own problems. The guys might keep banging on the window all night until Palmer answered. Foiled at Palmer's window, they might get in other ways, other windows. They might wake up his parents. And most important, with the window closed on a hot summer night and no one answering their taps on the pane, they might well become more suspicious than ever. No, the window had to stay open. He had to let them in. And that meant, of course, that Nipper could not be in the room. Neither could Palmer. He thought about it. They could go downstairs. They could hide in the dark. He did not think the guys would search the whole house. The target was his bedroom. And what could he say next day when Beans asked him where he was last night? He could say it was too hot in his room, so he slept downstairs on the sofa. Or even better, he stayed overnight at a relative's. The moon was beaming outside his window when a happy thought came to him. This whole thing could turn in his favor. Once they saw for themselves there was no pigeon, or evidence of a pigeon, they might drop their suspicions. They might believe him. They might back off. So maybe, crazy as it sounded, it was good that they were coming. Palmer had no trouble staying awake in the dark. He was too nervous to sleep. At last he heard his parents' footprints coming up the stairs. 10 minutes later, the bright crack under his bedroom door went dark. He waited until he thought they were asleep. He turned on the flashlight he had brought up for the night. Nipper was up at his usual spot on the closet shelf. When the light beam struck, the eye facing Palmer went from a buttonhole slit to orange button. Otherwise, the bird did not move. This was normal behavior, Palmer knew. Nipper would be easy to handle. When he settled down to roost, he went into a dopey trance that firecrackers could not disturb. Palmer stood on a chair and, cupping his hands, gently lifted his forbidden pet from the shelf. Holding both pigeon and flashlight was tricky, but Palmer managed to tiptoe downstairs without waking up the house. At first he sat on the sofa with Nipper in his lap. Still feeling unsafe, he went behind the sofa. He turned off the flashlight. In the utter darkness, he felt himself to be nothing but ears and fingertips. He could feel Nipper's heartbeat, putting away behind the toothpick ribs like a tiny motor scooter. He could feel the cold, golden gaze of the trophy pigeon 2 rooms away. The silence of the house at night was not total. Somewhere a clock was ticking. Cricks and creaks came from nearby and distant quarters, as if the house was twitching in a sleep of its own. Palmer tried to aim his hearing upstairs. He held his breath as long as he could, listening. Was that a window screen opening? A footstep? He pictured them in his room, shadows upon darkness, pointing at the bed. He's not here! Pointing under the bed, shining on the bookcase, the basket rim, the desk, the closet shelf, the empty closet shelf, the closet, oh no, the closet floor, the honey crunchers. He had forgotten to bring them downstairs. Would they see them? Would they figure the cereal was Palmer's for snacking? Or would they guess the real reason? He thought of going up, because maybe they were not there, racing up the stairs, grabbing the cereal box, and racing back down. 10 seconds was all he needed. He could do it. But what if they were there? What if that creak he just heard? He stayed put. He crouched and cringed behind the sofa as if neither furniture nor darkness were enough to hide him. He stayed through 1,000 talks of the unseen clock, and another 1,000, and the bonging of his heart, and only when he heard from behind the house 2 sharp, quick yelps did he know, for absolutely sure, that they had been there. And even then he waited for another 1,000 talks before he allowed himself a deep breath and, at last, sleep. Do you think the guys found the honey crunchers, and how do you think they are going to react to Palmer not being in his room? Why do you think they were there? A lot of questions. Let me know what you are thinking about what's happened today in the story and what you think's going to happen tomorrow. We're almost to the end. We're going to see what happens. Have a good day.